In the previous episode, we witnessed a remarkable shift as the Emperor, clearly pleased with Carlin's transformed demeanor and his triumphant victory in the Battle of Pvas, grants him an open offer to request any reward he desires. In a surprising show of humility, Carlisle simply requests a victory banquet, saying it has been far too long since he's enjoyed the fine wines of the capital. Beatrice, seated beside the Emperor, can hardly believe the change in Carlin's once arrogant behavior, suspecting that he may have a hidden agenda behind his visit to the capital. As the grand event begins, Carlin's entrance is nothing short of mesmerizing. Accompanied by his guards, their aura is so commanding that everyone in the room stops to stare. Carlisle, noticing the gazes, points it out to Decker, who finds the attention overwhelming and remarks that perhaps people are still disappointed in them. Carlisle is struck by Decker's innocence and naivety, cautioning him to be wary and advising, "Don't go following those ladies, no matter what tempting treats they offer." Decker, startled by the remark, quickly agrees. Amidst the gathering, Raffelt approaches Carlisle, reminding him that it is time for them to depart. But just as they're about to leave, Count de Pret, Cecilia's father, steps in. With an air of concern, he warmly greets Carlisle, mentioning how he's been sleepless with worry ever since he heard of Carlin's skirmish with the Igram tribe. Carlisle acknowledges the fierce battle, sharing that the Igram tribe fought with unusual tactics, even deploying trebuchets. Count de Pret, visibly disturbed, suggests that it's unlikely the Igram tribe alone could have such technology, hinting that they might have had outside help. But Carlisle swiftly cuts him off, aware that too many ears are listening. Recognizing the sensitivity of the situation, Count de Pret deftly shifts the conversation, inquiring about the reconstruction efforts underway in Pervaz. As the evening progressed, the chatter in the hall took a lively turn, with guests delving into whispered conversations about Carlin's past and speculating that it might have been the Empress herself who had him sent away from the capital. Adding fuel to the gossip, news of Carlin's contractual marriage, and the impending divorce set for 2 years from now, spread like wildfire among the attendees. Carlisle couldn't help but feel uneasy as he imagined the implications. Once word of his impending divorce circulated widely, he was certain that families across the empire would once again be angling to match their daughters with him. Indeed, Count de Pret and even his own mentor, Raffelt, had already begun making subtle suggestions. Despite the pressure, Carlisle felt no interest in any of the candidates, nor did he trust his own judgment to select a worthy partner. Sensing his discomfort, Raffelt leaned in, asking gently, "Are you feeling uneasy?" Carlisle shook off his mentor's concern, brushing it aside with a casual comment. It appeared they'd be inundated with invitations to various social gatherings while they were here in the capital. To manage it all, he instructed Raffelt to prioritize invitations from families with knights among their ranks, but to keep the schedule light, as they also had a significant visit to the temple on the agenda. In Pervaz, Asha stood by the window, gazing at the moon's soft glow. She thought it looked beautiful tonight and hoped that Carlisle and those with him in the capital were seeing the same sight. She wondered if the public's opinion of Carlisle had shifted, knowing how much he needed that freedom to investigate both the temple and the Empress's dealings. She knew they needed to rally as many nobles to their side as possible to solidify their influence. And once they achieved that, all that remained was confronting the Empress. As she pondered this, Bailey noticed her in the lobby and asked if she was patrolling alone. Asha replied that she had some free time, so she thought she'd make herself useful. Bailey advised her to rest, saying she and Carlisle both acted like they'd drop dead if they sat still for a second. With a playful grin, Asha teased him, asking if he was genuinely worried about her, reminding him how he'd sighed so much the first time he met her. Bailey replied, jokingly, that he'd hoped to finally meet some normal people here, only to find everyone was just as intense as Carlisle. After all, Carlisle laughed at a mean comment just as easily as she did. Asha, with a hint of curiosity, asked Bailey if he'd always thought that way. Bailey responded without hesitation, saying it wasn't a matter of thought, it was clear as day that she and Carlisle shared striking similarities. He went on, explaining that after the prince's return from dinner following the last battle, there was something unmistakably changed about him. Carlisle had a look that was almost serene, yet held a deep sadness and disappointment, as if something within him had shattered. Bailey continued, sharing that even if Asha were to suddenly turn her back on them and strike at the prince, he doubted Carlisle would let it shake him too deeply. Instead, it seemed that Carlisle now viewed her as someone who could vanish without warning, someone he felt the need to hold on to, almost like a fragile thread. Bailey speculated that Carlisle wanted her to live more cunningly, like a fox, to embrace a bit of greed. With a faint hesitation, Asha replied that she would never place anything above Pervaz, not for the rest of her life. Bailey immediately caught on, remarking that her words were exactly what he was talking about. It was a dangerous mindset. He pressed further, asking, "Where's your own happiness in that answer?" Asha, knowing deep down the truth of her situation, still insisted that she was happy. Bailey looked at her with understanding and said, "They say that God only gives good opportunities to those willing to save themselves. So, if you truly want something, I believe you'll find your way to it." He encouraged her to wish for something completely absurd, something bigger than just survival. For a brief, startling moment, Ashya imagined Carlisle becoming king, with herself standing right beside him. But shaking the thought away, she thanked Bailey for his words and took her leave. Meanwhile, in the quiet halls, Dorothea wandered, searching for the castle's library to pass the time reading while Carlisle and Raffald were away in the capital. Unable to find it, she was startled when Ashya called out from behind, asking her to identify herself. Dorothea turned around with a nervous expression, and Ashya quickly apologized, realizing her mistake, before asking what she was doing out at this late hour. Relieved it was Ashya, Dorothea explained her search for the library. Ashya, with a slight hesitation, informed her that there was indeed a library, though Dorothea noticed her expression darken as she said it. Regardless, Ashya invited Dorothea to follow her and led the way. When Ashya and Dorothea finally arrived at the library, Dorothea looked around, surprised to find the shelves relatively sparse. Despite the modest collection, the room was immaculate, clearly maintained with care, as though it still saw regular use. Ashya gestured toward the shelves, telling Dorothea that she was free to read whatever she liked, though there weren't too many books to choose from. Grateful, Dorothea beamed and thanked Ashya for taking the time to guide her there. After bidding her good night, Ashya left. As Dorothea browsed, she took a random book from the shelf and settled in to read. But as she scanned the pages, her thoughts drifted. She realized that once she ascended to the role of empress, her life would inevitably become rigid, every aspect governed by duty. The carefree days she enjoyed would vanish. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if it might be simpler, perhaps even happier, to live here in Pervaz instead. A week had passed since Prince Carlin's arrival in the capital, and the public's perception of the nobility had shifted dramatically. Conversations in the streets buzzed with speculation that Carlisle might indeed be the best choice for the next emperor. Listening to these fleeting praises, Carlisle couldn't help but think wryly that nobles seemed to change their loyalties faster than they changed their clothes. He knew these sentiments could just as quickly turn against him, so he resolved to root out any lingering sources of malicious rumors and silence them personally. To that end, Carlisle went to the mansion of Archbishop Radchel, a man who wielded significant influence over the temples within the capital. Upon meeting, Carlisle asked Radchel whether he oversaw all the temples in the city. Radchel clarified that while he held considerable authority, there was another archbishop currently residing at the main temple. Wasting no time, Carlisle got straight to the point, asking if Radchel knew anything about the malicious rumors circulating about him, rumors he was certain were being spread by temple members. His gaze hardened as he added that there was no need to feign ignorance. Locking eyes with the archbishop, Carlisle pressed further, demanding to know just how deeply both Radchel and the High Church were entangled with Gabriel Knox in this affair. Radchel, visibly defensive, insisted that Gabriel was one of their most devout followers, dismissing Carlin's suspicions as baseless. Losing patience, Carlin's expression grew fiercer. He leaned in, his tone unforgiving, and demanded a clear answer. Was the High Church truly planning to stand against the royal family? Because that, he emphasized, was exactly what he intended to uncover. Radchel, taken aback, asked Carlisle how he could believe such accusations. Without hesitation, Carlisle replied that Gabriel's ambitions were obvious. He'd been steadily amassing power by creating new political roles for his benefit and had even established a holiday to display heightened reverence for the High Church. This, of course, went hand in hand with his covert attempts to spread damaging rumors. Carlisle then questioned whether these decisions were made independently, without the counsel of the High Church's entire leadership. Radchel, in a tone meant to reassure, insisted that the High Church had always acted with the prosperity and welfare of the imperial family in mind. He urged Carlisle to trust him, emphasizing that they had never intended any disrespect. Rising to his feet, Carlisle gave a final, cutting response. If Radchel's claim held true, then Gabriel alone was behind these acts of impropriety. Given his brazen actions, Carlisle suggested that it seemed Gabriel might be aiming to seize the position of the youngest pope in history by any means necessary. With an intense look, Carlisle asked if Radchel didn't think Gabriel's misconduct warranted punishment. Leaving that question hanging, Carlisle made his exit, his resolve unshaken. A few days later, while sharing a meal at the mansion, Carlisle remarked playfully that it must have been too long since he'd eaten at the royal table, as his taste buds seemed sharper than ever. The emperor laughed heartily and teased that Carlisle must have grown tired of eating mere grassroots out in Pvas. Carlisle chuckled, agreeing that compared to the feast here, everything he'd eaten in Pervaz could indeed be called grassroots. Beatrice, smiling, praised Carlin's efforts, acknowledging the success he'd brought to Pervaz. She suggested that, since the urgency at the Pervaz borders seemed subdued for now, Carlane should return to the capital. Carlane, however, responded that Pervaz wasn't truly safe yet, pointing out that they still hadn't uncovered the accomplice behind the Igrim tribe's last attack. His reply caught the emperor's interest, as he hadn't known there was a hidden hand aiding the tribe. Carlane explained further, saying there had been unusual occurrences during the battle that hinted at outside support, though gathering intel alone had proven difficult. So, he humbly asked if the emperor might lend his wisdom to help unravel the mystery. Carlane added, in a lighter tone, that he'd appreciate a private conversation afterward, in the emperor's room if he didn't mind. The emperor, evidently pleased, readily agreed, expressing that he'd gladly offer his son any wisdom he could provide. As father and son enjoyed their lively chat, Carlin's stepmother Beatrice watched them closely. Though her face held a polite smile, inside, she was far from pleased to witness such a warm bond forming between them. After the meal, Carlane entered the emperor's opulent office, where the emperor warmly invited him to enjoy a cup of exquisite tea he had brought back from the enchanting Damare island. After savoring a sip, Carlane praised the rich flavor, expressing his gratitude for his father's refined taste. However, beneath the pleasantries lay a pressing concern that Carlane could no longer ignore. He steeled himself and broached the topic that truly occupied his mind, questioning his father about the church's alarming interference with the imperial family. The emperor, initially perplexed by Carlin's inquiry, sought clarification. Seizing the opportunity, Carlane elaborated, explaining that he had heard whispers of the church's plans to create a new holiday. This revelation ignited his worries about whether these decisions truly reflected his father's will. Carlane reminded the emperor that the empire was allied with numerous kingdoms, many of which had faced oppression at the hands of the High Church in the past. He acknowledged that if this new initiative was indeed his father's choice, then he must have considered all its implications. Yet, Carlane couldn't suppress his growing unease. He articulated his belief that the High Church had become so deeply entrenched and recognized that it was on the brink of corruption, driven by an insatiable hunger for power. His concern was genuine, but it was also a strategic maneuver. He hoped to prompt the emperor to recognize that someone might be shrouding him in darkness, manipulating him like a puppet. Meanwhile, in a shadowy corner of his domain, Gabriel seethed upon discovering Carlin's schemes. Fury consumed him as he realized Carlane was jeopardizing everything he had worked tirelessly to achieve. In a blind rage, he began chanting incantations from a sinister book of black magic, accidentally unleashing a fatal spell that struck down a nearby bird. The moment he realized the extent of his actions, a wave of horror washed over him. Gabriel felt an unsettling shift within himself, as though he were losing his very identity since embracing the dark arts. At this rate, he feared he would become no different from the very nobles he detested. Determined to reclaim his purpose, Gabriel resolved to channel his anger into something monumental. Carlane would become the perfect sacrifice for the empire's future. This would ignite the fire of his vision for the right empire, one that he could mold according to his ideals, no matter the cost. Suddenly, one of Gabriel's pupils burst into the room, his expression a mix of urgency and alarm. He quickly reported that Carlane was beginning to suspect the High Church was slowly encroaching upon the imperial family's authority. Moreover, whispers circulated that Carlane was plotting to dismantle the political positions held by religious figures. Gabriel's eyes narrowed with suspicion as he questioned his pupil, demanding to know what the other nobles were saying about this burgeoning unrest. The pupil, visibly agitated, replied that a significant number of nobles were growing alarmed by Carlin's ambitions. However, a few had even expressed a desire to withdraw their support from the church. Gabriel's disbelief was palpable. Has the empire sunk so low that they believe mere gold can intimidate me? He scoffed, incredulous at the corruption festering among the nobility. The pupil, fueled by indignation, echoed Gabriel's sentiments. The nobles are driven solely by their selfish interests. Carlane is manipulating them to obstruct the formation of the Holy Empire. His anger crackled in the air, ready to ignite further conflict. Gabriel, however, took a deep breath, forcing himself to regain composure. He refrained from acting rashly, choosing instead to inquire further about the reports from the abandoned lands. The pupil explained eagerly that the new officers sent on the expedition had discovered something extraordinary. They reported that a strange, potent energy pulsed throughout the abandoned territories, akin to the dark power Gabriel himself wielded. A wicked grin spread across Gabriel's face, illuminating his eyes with malevolence. A month after arriving at the capital, Raffles suggested to Carlane that they should extend their stay for another month to further solidify the positive sentiments building around him. However, Carlane shook his head, his resolve unwavering. People are becoming increasingly anxious the longer we delay without tangible results, he replied, his tone firm. Before Raffles could offer further persuasion, Carlane added, "The main reason is that it's growing harder for me to stand by my father during this waiting game." Understanding Carlin's troubled state of mind, Raffles conceded, "Very well, then, we will depart for Pervaz in 3 days as planned." As Raffles took his leave, his gaze lingered on Decker, who stood steadfastly beside Carlane, ever the devoted bodyguard. Once the door closed behind Raffles, Carlane voiced a concern that had been nagging at him. "I can't shake the feeling that Gabriel has infused the palace with that strange energy as well, it's exhausting me." Decker, ever the pragmatist, interjected, "It's likely because you haven't trained since our arrival in the capital. Your body is probably just sore from the lack of activity." Carlane raised an eyebrow, knowing Decker was right. He couldn't ignore the growing restlessness within him. "I'm aware of that," he replied, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. "So you should be prepared to take responsibility for saying that directly to me." Decker hadn't intended to provoke a training session, he had merely made an observation. But Carlin's eagerness to train had been ignited, and he was in no mood to back down. With a flicker of determination in his eyes, Decker readied himself for a spar. "All right, I'll give you the first strike," Carlane offered, a competitive glint in his eye. Decker lunged, but Carlane expertly blocked the attack, using the momentum to push Decker back before countering with a swift strike of his own. Yet, Decker was quick, dodging Carlin's blow with remarkable agility. Carlane smirked, refusing to let Decker's evasion slide. In an instant, he retaliated, executing a perfectly timed counter-move aimed at his opponent. The air crackled with energy as they engaged, each strike echoing the mounting intensity of their duel. After defeating Decker, Carlane offered genuine praise, saying, "You fought well. Ashya has chosen the right man to be her first officer." Decker felt a rush of honor at those words, appreciating the recognition from Carlane. Yet, a hint of hesitation clouded Decker's expression as he broached a sensitive topic. "Is the reason you're so eager to return to Pvas connected to Lady Dupret and Lady Raffles?" Carlane was quick to dispel the notion. "Where did you get that idea?" "I assure you, it's not like that. I'm not as frivolous as you think, and I'm certainly not a womanizer." The atmosphere shifted, and with the tension easing, Carlane felt emboldened to ask, "So, what's your relationship with Ashya now? I heard you were supposed to be her husband in the past." Decker took a breath, relieved to clarify. "It's true that people have said that, but it's not accurate at all. We're more like siblings. Ashya's brother, Vincent, used to tease her about marriage all the time. You should have seen the faces she made when he brought it up." Carlane listened intently, realizing that Decker and Ashya's relationship was not as romantic as he had initially thought. With a newfound curiosity, Decker pressed on, gathering his courage. "What are you planning to do about Ashya once you reclaim the throne and become emperor? After all, according to the contract, she won't have any ties to you once it ends." Carlane paused, contemplating the weight of the question. "We'll discuss it further after the contract is successfully concluded," he said, his voice steady but laced with resolve. "But rest assured, I will take care of my allies, especially her." Back in the resplendent halls of Pervaz Castle, Cecilia extended a warm invitation to Ashya and Dorothea for a delightful tea party. As they gathered in the elegantly adorned room, the trio settled down to savor the chilled tea, a refreshing respite from the sweltering summer heat. Ashya couldn't help but marvel at the sumptuous surroundings. The opulence of the castle felt almost overwhelming, a stark contrast to her simpler upbringing. Cecilia, her eyes sparkling with excitement, leaned in to share a special detail. "The enchanting fragrance of this tea is crafted from dried oranges and rosemary," she declared, a proud smile gracing her lips. In a moment of genuine curiosity, Ashya's brow furrowed as she asked, "What are oranges?" Cecilia and Dorothea exchanged incredulous glances, their astonishment palpable.